The present case study takes place in Montelíbano, Córdoba. We name the study Socioeconomic Inequalities and Language Heresies in Language Learning in the case of Montelíbano, Córdoba. The chosen school, named San Bernardo High School, served more than 900 students from low and middle low class families. Spanish has been the dominant language of daily life, while English is taught as a foreign language. Yet, socioeconomic inequality shapes who can truly access English learning opportunities. In addition, there are only 2 hours in classes per week, which makes study the language difficult. This situation reveals the invisible curriculum. English proficiency has become a hidden marker of privilege and success. The study is taken by dimension. The first one called educational dimension. Taking about the curriculum, it has been emphasizing English proficiency through standardized Eurocentric methods such as drills, vocabulary tests, and test preparation. These approaches rarely connect English to student local realities. In his study, Kasayar in 2021 explained that teachers' identity in English language teaching is often shaped by colonial expectation, pushing educators to replicate foreign models instead of adapting to the needs of Colombian classroom. In Montelíbano, this means that students are taught to value English as a global resource but not as a language that can connect to their own community.
Okay, now let's move to the sociocultural and identity dimension. So we have here this parallel. On one hand, we have the sociocultural dynamics that are present in this context. So in the classroom, language hierarchies tend to be reinforced. Spanish is perceived as the everyday language, while English is associated with prestige. This dynamic reflects broader sociocultural inequalities within the community. On the other hand, we have identity. So, students' identities are shaped by the invisible curriculum that is present in bilingual classroom. Implicit messages about which language is more valued may influence how students perceive their abilities and their sense of belonging in the learning environment. So, how can this be perceived and also how can this be transformed? So, now let's move to the intercultural communication, and we are going to take this quote from Sabir Hanova that defines intercultural communication as the exchange between people from different cultures. However, in this context, English teaching remains symbolic, focusing on foreign dialects rather than on students' lived realities. This is closely related to the sociocultural dimension. And on the other hand, regarding the students' identity, we have this important quote that mentions that when students feel their languages and cultural backgrounds are respected, they are more likely to develop confidence and actively participate in the classroom. According to Lucido, Jimenez, and Tang, that is the ideal um, identity that we would like to work on this context.
National policies often promote English as a tool for globalization and competitiveness, but they're not local inequalities. Here we can see an example, estándares básicos de aprendizaje. Most of the time, English is imposed as a requirement for university admission or employment. Then not all learners have equal access to learning. For example, a student what is not proficient enough. This reflects the coloniality of knowledge described by Walter Mignolo 2007, where foreign languages are valued over local cultural repertoires. In our local communities, English has become a gatekeeper to opportunities reinforcing social divisions. These dynamics can also shape the invisible curriculum, where English is implicitly associated with prestige, academic success, and global mobility, while local linguistic practices may be perceived as less valuable. In linguistics, Montelibano can be described as a multilingual context where Spanish and English coexist. However, the presence of multiple languages doesn't necessarily translate into the development of plurilingual competence, as the use of English is often associated with academic and economic advancements rather than with everyday social interaction within the community. In this sense, the language is present in the context tends to remain functionally separate. According to Ophelia and Lewin, 2014, translanguaging practices allow students to mobilize their full linguistic repertoires to construct meaning and participate more actively in learning. Promoting translanguaging will therefore validate students' linguistic resources and help them perceive English not as a barrier but as a complementary resource alongside Spanish. This perspective, aligned with plurilingual education, which recognizes the interaction between languages and values linguistic diversity as a pedagogical resource rather than a problem.
Now, expanding on all these ideas, we have the cultural versus nationality distinctions. So we have that in context, in the community of Montelibano, Córdoba, Colombian nationality does not necessarily imply a homogeneous culture, but this is very important to take into account as assuming a single Colombian culture risks oversimplifying the diversity present in classroom. Supporting this idea, Kim in 2001 mentions that recognizing and valuing students' linguistic and cultural identities is essential for creating inclusive learning environments. To exemplify this, we have this line that is cultural heritage. So, in particularly regarding the economic activities from this community, Montelibano Córdoba has its economic mainly influenced by mining, particularly the ferronickel production of Cerro Matoso mine, which generates employment and economic activity in the region. So, rural areas also depend on agriculture and cattle ranching as traditional sources of income, shaping the livelihoods of both urban and rural communities. Here, it is also important to mention that all these elements and these economic and social activities are not explicit in the curriculum and contexts that are taught in this school. So it's close connected to what we mentioned before, that learning can be descontextualized to their realities.
Finally, we like to present a proposal conclusion for this challenge. To address this since challenge, we must advocate for intercultural bilingual curriculum that is seen in Model 1 taught by UNESCO in 2015. This curriculum should integrate translanguage practice, local reference, and decolonial pedagogy. As teachers, we should position ourselves to challenge the invisible curriculum and empower students to see their language and identity as value. For instance, we can design projects where learners use both Spanish and English to explore local issues such as environment concept or community life, making English meaningful, accessible, and connected to their own realities.